It all started on a quiet Monday night. Seth Meyers, host of NBC's Late Night, took to the stage with his usual smirk and signature sarcasm. This time, though, his monologue took a different turn, one that would soon ignite a firestorm across America's political spectrum. Meyers, known for his liberal-leaning jabs at the Trump administration, introduced a segment he called the realist fake White House briefing, a direct spoof of Karoline Leavitt, the bold and unapologetic White House press secretary serving under President Donald J. Trump. With a cheap blonde wig, an exaggerated New Hampshire accent, and enough sarcasm to fill the Lincoln Memorial, Meyers impersonated Leavitt in what he believed was harmless satire. "I'm Karoline Leavitt," he mocked in a high-pitched voice, holding a toy microphone. "And today, I'll be answering 0 questions and reminding you that tariffs are love letters from Trump to America." The audience erupted in laughter, but not everyone was amused. Back in Washington, D.C., Leavitt was preparing for an early morning press briefing when one of her aides walked into her office, iPad in hand. "You need to see this?" the aide said grimly, pressing play on the viral clip. Leavitt sat back in her leather chair, arms crossed, watching Meyers twist her words, misrepresent her policies, and ridicule her demeanor. The audience clapped like seals. The studio lights beamed as if mocking her personally. But instead of fury, a smile curled across her face. "All right," she whispered, her blue eyes gleaming with determination. "He wants a show? I'll give him one." The next morning, the White House press briefing room was unusually packed. Word had already begun circulating that Leavitt would be responding, directly and unfiltered. Reporters from every major network filled the seats, some expecting drama, others hoping for damage control. She stepped up to the podium in a sharp red blazer, the presidential seal gleaming behind her, and began. "Before we start, I'd like to address a performance that aired on NBC last night," she said calmly, scanning the room. "Late Night with Seth Meyers. Or, as we now call it here in the White House, Late Night with Seth Meyers." Laughter echoed in the room, not from the press corps, but from a small group of interns and staffers in the back who clearly knew what was coming. Leavitt continued, unflinching. "Mr. Meyers, I want to thank you for the free national coverage. Millions of Americans who hadn't heard of our tariff reform policies are now Googling them thanks to your, shall we say, avant-garde comedy routine." The press was stunned. "But let's get one thing straight," she added. "This administration doesn't rely on cue cards and laugh tracks. We rely on results. While you're busy playing pretend with toy microphones, we're negotiating real trade deals that protect American jobs." The room shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't your typical press secretary soundbite. This was a takedown. Her words went viral within minutes. Clips of the moment trended across X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Supporters hailed her as a conservative lioness who wouldn't be bullied by Hollywood elites. Detractors called her response too harsh, too personal, and unprofessional. But Karoline didn't care. Behind closed doors, President Trump was briefed on the situation. He reportedly chuckled and said, "That girl's got fire. Reminds me of me." Back at Late Night, the reaction from Meyers was one of stunned silence. He hadn't expected a reply, much less a national moment that made him the punchline of his own joke. And Leavitt? She was just getting started. Karoline Leavitt's fiery rebuke to Seth Meyers lit up the internet like a 4th of July fireworks show. In DC, conservative influencers began sharing the clip with headlines like, "Karoline just nuked Seth Meyers," without even raising her voice, and "America's press secretary strikes back." Within 48 hours, the video had racked up over 40 million views. But Karoline wasn't done. No, this wasn't going to be a one and done. The day after the press briefing, she accepted an invitation to appear on Tucker Carlson Tonight, now airing on a major independent network since Tucker's departure from Fox. The interview was scheduled for prime time, and everyone knew this would be the real counterpunch. Dressed in a simple yet elegant navy blue dress, Karoline walked onto Tucker's set with the poise of someone who knew she was holding the upper hand. "Karoline," Tucker began, a smirk playing on his face, "you've gone more viral than any press secretary I can remember, and all it took was a late-night clown with a fake wig and a plastic mic. What's your take?" Karoline laughed softly. Tucker, This is exactly what we've come to expect from the entertainment wing of the Democratic Party. Seth Meyers pretends he's a comedian, but what he's really doing is pushing the left's agenda under the cover of laughter. Tucker leaned in, intrigued. So what's the game plan? Call them out, Karoline said without hesitation. These people mock not just me, but every American who supports this administration, every factory worker who got their job back, every parent who wants their kid to learn math instead of Marxism. And they do it from behind studio lights and security gates. The audience in the studio applauded. But I'll give Mr. Meyers this, she added. He's excellent at satire. Too bad he has no idea what he's talking about. His spoof briefing made fun of our tariffs, called them Trump's taxes on happiness. But guess what? Since we implemented those tariffs, small American manufacturers are thriving again. Karoline then pulled out a folder. Yes, live on air, and opened it. I brought receipts, Tucker, she said, as she held up charts and graphs. Steel production is up 26% since last quarter. Auto manufacturing is finally returning to states like Ohio and Michigan. These tariffs? They're working. But if you only get your news from late-night TV, you'd never know. Tucker chuckled. This is why they're scared of you. The clip from that interview dominated social media for the next 2 days. The hashtag Karoline Claps Back trended for 72 hours. Even mainstream outlets like CNN and MSNBC were forced to cover it, albeit through gritted teeth. But over at late night, Seth Meyers was feeling the heat. Sources from NBC reported internal panic. Meyers, who was used to being the puncher, had quickly become the punched. Advertisers were jittery. Executives were worried. Social media was ablaze with calls to have Karoline on the show and let her speak for real. Seth's team mulled over the idea. Would it be ratings gold or a PR disaster? Meanwhile, Karoline was more than ready. In fact, she was already preparing for round 3. Because when it came to defending her administration and the American people, she wasn't about to let a late-night comedian rewrite the narrative. The Trump administration, now in its second term, had faced down foreign adversaries, media onslaughts, and economic disasters. A skit on NBC wasn't going to scare anyone, least of all Karoline Leavitt. She wasn't just a press secretary anymore. She was a warrior in a tailored blazer. And America was watching. By Friday morning, the battle between Karoline Leavitt and Seth Meyers had gone from late-night comedy to national debate fodder. Cable news couldn't get enough of it. Fox News, Newsmax, and ONN called it a media reckoning. Even mainstream outlets like CNN reluctantly acknowledged Karoline's growing cultural influence, with one analyst noting, "She's not just speaking for the Trump administration. She's become a symbol of red state America pushing back against elite mockery." Then, the unthinkable happened. NBC released a teaser. Karoline Leavitt, live on Late Night with Seth Meyers, Monday night. The internet exploded. Was it a joke? A trap? Or was it real? Within hours, it was confirmed. Karoline had agreed to appear live in studio. It would be the most high-profile conservative appearance on the show since Donald Trump himself hosted Saturday Night Live back in 2015. The anticipation was electric. Insiders from both political camps were biting their nails. NBC producers were reportedly walking on glass, preparing the segment, unsure whether to script it or let it run live. Meanwhile, conservatives were thrilled. Finally, someone from their corner was walking straight into enemy territory, not to be laughed at, but to fight back. And Karoline? She was cool as ice. That Monday, she arrived in New York City dressed like she belonged on the cover of Forbes. White blazer, black trousers, sleek heels. The crowd outside 30 Rockefeller Plaza was chaotic. Protesters and supporters alike waved signs, shouted slogans, and tried to get a glimpse of the young woman who had somehow become the face of cultural pushback in America. Backstage, Seth Meyers was nervous. He'd never been in this position before, where the guest might actually have the upper hand. He was used to friendly interviews, applause lines, and cherry-picked guests. But now he was hosting a woman who had dismantled him live from the White House. As the cameras rolled and the theme music played, Meyers walked onto the stage smiling, but his eyes showed hesitation. He welcomed the audience, cracked a few jokes, and finally said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Please welcome White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt." The crowd gave a polite but mixed reception. Some boos, some applause. Karoline walked out with grace, nodded to the crowd, and sat down opposite Meyers, legs crossed, posture perfect. The tension was real. "Karoline," Seth began with a half-smile. "Thanks for coming. I'm honestly surprised you said yes." Karoline smiled back. "Well, you invited me. I figured someone here ought to talk about the real world." Boom. The crowd gasped. Meyers chuckled nervously. Seth tried to pivot. "So, you saw the skit I did last week. Some people thought it was a little harsh." Karoline tilted her head. "I did. And if that's what passes for comedy these days, I'd say the real tragedy isn't politics. It's network TV." Oof. Laughter and applause broke out, not all of it ironic. "I don't mind being joked about," she added. "But when you misrepresent actual policy that affects millions of Americans, that's not comedy. That's propaganda with a punchline." Seth tried to counter. "I mean, isn't it fair to say some of your briefings have been evasive?" Karoline didn't flinch. "I answer questions every day in a room full of journalists who want me to fail. And I do it without cue cards, laugh tracks, or a team of writers. Can you say the same?" The room went silent. Even Seth was momentarily stunned. But Karoline leaned in, softening her tone. "Look, Seth, I'm not here to own you. I'm here because millions of Americans feel mocked by media personalities who've never stepped foot in a coal town or stood in line at a VA hospital. And someone needs to remind you, those people matter." Suddenly, the tone shifted. She wasn't just dismantling a late-night host anymore. She was giving a voice to forgotten Americans, live in their opponent's backyard. Seth, perhaps for the first time in years, had no punchline. Karoline had walked into the lion's den. And the lion blinked first. By the time the interview between Karoline Leavitt and Seth Meyers ended, the audience in the studio was buzzing with a mixture of awe and disbelief. There had been no shouting match, no walk-offs, no stage drama. Just facts, poise, and confidence from Karoline that had effectively turned the show's usual rhythm on its head. Seth closed the segment awkwardly. "Well, that was different. Thank you, Karoline." Karoline smiled. "Thanks for having me. Maybe next time we'll do it in the White House briefing room. I promise the jokes are better." Even some of Seth's own staff chuckled. As soon as the credits rolled, social media detonated like a cultural bomb. Clips of Karoline's takedowns flooded X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram Reels. The hashtags #CarolineOnFire, #LionInTheDen, and #LateNightSmackdown began trending simultaneously. Even liberals couldn't deny the seismic moment they just witnessed. On Reddit, one user wrote, "I'm a Democrat, but she ate. That's it. No crumbs." Influencers across the spectrum weighed in. Conservative voices hailed her bravery and intellect. Megyn Kelly called the appearance historic. Ben Shapiro said it was one of the cleanest dismantlings of late-night groupthink I've ever seen. More surprisingly, even centrists and moderate liberals were nodding. Joe Rogan said on his podcast, "She didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She just walked in there and owned her space. That's rare today." News outlets scrambled to cover the cultural ripple effect. CNN's morning panel admitted that while they didn't agree with Karoline politically, they had to respect her performance. "She made a compelling case," said one panelist, "and she didn't even need applause lines to do it." Meanwhile, inside the West Wing, President Donald Trump was reportedly beaming. "That's my press secretary," he declared during a closed-door staff meeting. "I told you all we picked a fighter. And the country saw it last night." The Trump campaign immediately turned Karoline's appearance into a highlight reel. The ad featured clips of her calmly correcting Seth's false narratives, laying out the tariff numbers, and speaking up for everyday Americans. The tagline? "She speaks for you, not for them." But perhaps the biggest shock came days later when late-night ratings were released. Late Night with Seth Meyers had posted one of its highest-rated episodes in over 3 years. And yet, the data painted a sobering picture for Meyers' team. Of the millions who tuned in, a massive spike came from red states, places like Texas, Ohio, Alabama, and Idaho. These weren't regular viewers of NBC's late-night lineup. These were Americans who tuned in because they finally saw someone like them walk into the echo chamber and break the glass. Suddenly, questions swirled within NBC. Was it time to rethink the show's direction? Should they bring on more conservative voices, not just to debate, but to represent? The producers didn't have a clear answer. But what they did know was this. Karoline Leavitt had flipped the script in ways they hadn't anticipated. Back at the White House, Karoline continued her duties like nothing had changed. Press briefings resumed. She fielded questions on international policy, trade, and education. But now, when reporters challenged her, they did so with a bit more caution, a little more respect, because everyone had seen what happened when Karoline Leavitt was underestimated. And nobody wanted to be the next Seth Meyers. The days following Karoline Leavitt's late-night triumph were nothing short of monumental for both her career and the cultural war sweeping across America. NBC's boardroom buzzed with heated meetings. Executives, producers, and PR consultants debated for hours. Ratings were up, but so was criticism from within their traditional base. Some called Karoline's appearance a platforming of dangerous ideologies. Others saw it differently. She didn't yell. She didn't spread disinfo. She schooled our guy with data. And honestly, one senior producer muttered in a leaked recording, "She looked like the only adult in the room." Back in DC, Karoline's approval rating skyrocketed. Among conservatives, she was hailed as a media slayer. Fox News dedicated an entire hour-long special to her performance. She was invited to appear on The Joe Rogan Experience, Bill Maher's Club Random, and even got a call from Oprah's production team. She turned down most offers. "I'm not an influencer," she told her team. "I'm here to serve the American people, not chase headlines." But the buzz didn't stop. Her inbox was flooded with interview requests. Her speeches were quoted in campaign rallies, and Trump himself began referring to her as America's voice. That Friday, at a Trump rally in Columbus, Ohio, the president brought her on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Trump boomed to thunderous applause, "let me introduce the toughest press secretary in American history, the one who just turned Seth Meyers into Seth cries." The crowd erupted. Karoline took the mic, smiling with humility. "Thank you, Mr. President. But really, I just told the truth." And apparently that's revolutionary these days. The moment went viral. Again. What began as a feud over a spoof skit had now morphed into a symbolic reckoning between Middle America and the coastal media elite. And in the eye of the storm stood Karoline. Unshaken, unapologetic, and unrelenting. The cultural left scrambled to respond. Some tried to double down, accusing Karoline of being a right-wing provocateur in lipstick. Others nervously began reassessing their tone. One progressive writer at The Atlantic published a piece titled, "We mocked her. She showed up. What now?" The piece concluded, "We can't keep dismissing people we disagree with as cartoon villains." Karoline Leavitt reminded us that behind every talking point, there's a person. And sometimes, that person is smarter, calmer, and more prepared than we expect. Meanwhile, on college campuses across the country, Karoline became a new kind of hero. Not because she was famous, but because she was fearless. Young conservative women now had a role model who wasn't afraid to walk into hostile territory and come out with dignity and dominance. Campus events began featuring panels titled "Be Like Karoline" or "How to Win with Facts, Not Fury." She inspired a new wave of youth engagement in politics, especially among women tired of being told they had to choose between being smart and being strong. And in the most unexpected twist, even Seth Meyers, grudgingly, acknowledged the impact. In a follow-up segment a week later, he offered a rare moment of sincerity. "Well," he said, smiling awkwardly at the camera, "turns out Karoline Leavitt can take a joke and hand one back with interest. Respect." The crowd laughed, more warmly this time. That he continued, "We may not agree on much, but we do agree that conversation beats cancellation. And if you're watching, Karoline, next time, drinks are on me." That clip alone earned a standing ovation from both sides of the aisle. For once, there was a glimmer of common ground. But Karoline wasn't banking on consensus. She knew politics was war with words, and in that war, the battlefield was the culture. Her moment on late night had proven one thing. Americans weren't looking for echo chambers anymore. They were hungry for real talk from real people with real courage. And as she stood in the White House briefing room the following Monday, delivering her latest press conference with her usual composure, the words she ended with rang louder than ever before. Mock me if you must, but mock the American people and I'll be back. Every time, the room was silent. And for the first time in years, the press pool didn't laugh. They listened.